Hey guys, Yui here, and we're back with another commentary, this time for the 1982 Ridley Scott masterpiece, Blade Runner. Yeah, you might have heard of it. I don't know. It's the final cut. We're not doing that other cut bullshit. It's the final one, the last, the best, I guess, question mark. Yeah, me and Tomo here. We're going to rock right through this, and you can listen alongside as an audio podcasty thing, or you can like play your movie with us and start it from when we do a countdown, and then press play when we do, and you can hear our thoughts directly on the movie as we see it. All right, you ready, Tomo?
I'm ready. I'm ready. I think I'm ready. I know I'm ready. Let's go.
Well, if you're not ready, then you're a fucking replicant.
No, I'm definitely ready.
All right, 3, 2, 1, go.
Oh man. I say I'm ready. I come at this whole enterprise with a great deal of trepidation and just pressure. This
It's
is
gonna it's
like
gonna be okay.
this
I
is
mean,
huge.
you're not going to therapy here. Like it'll be fine.
I am in a way. To preface this with a short story. My history with this film is I think when I was about 8 years old, I was really, really into films. Hadn't really seen that many, but every film you see at the very beginning with the credits, you always see the director name. And after a while, I asked my mum, who's your favorite director? My mum said that her favorite director was Ridley Scott. So from
Yo,
that moment
your
on,
mom, can I just say your mom is so incredibly based. Like she's so cool.
well, she obviously grew up
Your
in the
mom's
80s.
obviously a big Black Rain fan.
She loves Black Rain. I'm not even kidding. Like she's really into
Hell
Black Rain.
yes.
Like she used to talk about it, and to this day, I still haven't actually fucking seen Black Rain.
Oh
But she loved
wow.
Black Rain, and my sort of family, my dad was an artist, and like he had like an art background, and um, I I didn't, like my mum said, Ridley Scott is the guy. And I knew about Alien when I was kind of young, and everyone had told me in my family, this is the scariest film ever. No one lives through it. And that freaked me out, and I was so obsessed with seeing this film. I was way too young to see it, but I was completely obsessed by it. I didn't get to much later, and I think I actually got to Blade Runner first. But I'm growing up, and I'm like a huge fan of films, and I love like Bond movies, and I love action films and blockbusters and Star Wars and disaster movies seem to be a big deal in the 90s and blockbusters and all this kind of stuff. And then I think when I was about 12, I saw that this film, this Ridley Scott film, Blade Runner, which I'd only heard of and seen like a smattering of images from, was on TV, the director's cut. So I videotaped it off the TV. This is going back a little while, when we used to videotape stuff. And I watched it the next day, and I'm watching through it, and it kind of plays on, it's hitting all my kind of like sort of synaptic responses for like visual stimuli, and it's about robots and it's futuristic, and it's got the Lego kid in me is kind of coming out and really getting into it all. But over the course of watching it, I have what I can only describe as some kind of like miraculous, just something happens in me, like really, really kind of profound. Is that I see within this film something and the only true way I can think to describe it is feeling as if I'd been born with it, if that makes any sense, like a recognition of a kind of artistic intent, like deep within the film that just literally goes straight through me. I don't think I've had that experience. Maybe, a handful of films where you feel like genuinely recognized by a film. And over the years, I kind of read more about Ridley Scott and his art background. Like he was an artist and draws, and he's from kind of a slightly different area of England where I grew up. But the nature of this film, the design, the kind of subconscious, the postmodernism, all of that was kind of around, and all of it just kind of hit me. And I think there was something in that I completely recognized that I have to be a filmmaker for this reason. It kind of justified something in me. so many different things. It's really difficult to articulate, you know, sort of me doing it. This is why I have this trepidation about trying to comment on this film. Is so loaded for me. You know, there's so much in it that I could say and trying to extrapolate, and I worry that I'll never actually get kind of what I'm trying to say. Anyway, that was quite a long preamble, but I feel maybe kind of important just to address before we get into it.
Well, uh, firstly, I just think half of this movie's power is almost in this beginning where you just have like the straight up text crawl,
Yeah,
and then this like silent drift through a city.
yeah,
And yeah, I mean, it's just really at its very best. Like, I'm not gonna
yeah.
lie. Like with this film, this has been a contentious film for me throughout my entire life. Like,
Oh, okay, yeah.
I have not had the more see, like the version you're talking about for me was Alien, whereas like I was obsessed with that
Oh,
from the very
sure.
beginning. Like that's like a
Yeah, yeah.
huge touchstone for me. This, I came to it, and I came to all the stuff that it was influenced by, and so I liked it as a teenager, and then as like a contrarian young critic, I was very much being like, yeah, it's okay, but there's not enough plot and it's overrated and all that kind of stuff. Like that was me like circa like 2018.
Yeah,
Um and over the years since then, through many rewatches, just because it's a movie that you kind of become obsessed with, like anything
yeah.
else. I very much, especially in delving into Ridley's career, I was like, actually, like it's kind of the key central text in many ways for his stuff,
Mm,
even more than Alien, which kind of has like more of like the Dan O'Bannon, like Walter Hill. You get a little bit of that in there,
yeah.
but like this, I mean, like Ridley Scott doing a Philip K. Dick adaptation.
Mm,
I mean, it's just the most important science fiction movie since 2001. Like some would argue more important than
completely.
2001. Like it's, it's just completely seminal. And I don't want this commentary to be like 2 hours of us like just fucking wanking over like, oh my god, whatever, it's so beautiful. But like, firstly, this is a
It's hard
beautiful
not
movie.
to, though.
This is a
Yeah,
perfect looking movie. Like I fucking
yeah,
challenge
completely.
anyone. I don't give a shit like what your other claims are. Like this movie is a fucking 5-star heater on the
Yeah,
visuals alone, motherfucker. Like
I
you,
would say
this
personally,
truly
yeah,
does not get better than this. Like everything looks perfect.
I would
Like
say,
it's
yeah.
astonishing.
I think personally, like for me at least, it is the best looking movie. Like I can't. It's not just a question of faulting elements of it against one thing or the other. It's about the aberrations. You know, it's about the imperfections. That's what makes it for me the most beautiful film, more than I think a Kubrick film. Because, like you say, 2001 is also a beautiful film, but it's beautiful in a very different way, in a very kind of
It's more
deliberately,
clinical.
yeah, it's clinical, it's symmetrical, it's kind of this pristine, very deeply considered. But I think one of the things when Ridley is really on is that he embraces the kind of messiness of things, you know, like the tangle of images. And, you know, the first cut of this, there are like so many mistakes. And I know Ridley sat there and went, I don't give a shit. Like, I don't fucking care. Like, you're missing the point if you're looking at continuity, you know, like albeit
Well,
I
I mean,
obviously with
firstly,
this
like
cut,
that's never mattered at all. Like, frankly, if
yeah,
people get upset about continuity in movies, like,
yeah,
fuck off. Like,
I've got
like,
no
frankly,
interest.
you're dumb. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, that's like
Yeah,
IMDb trivia core nonsense.
and he gets that. Ridley completely gets that. I think he just says, stop trying to draw, you know, lines together and just take in stuff the way you would in the real world. You know, like I think he's really interesting because when you listen to him talk, he comes across as this very no nonsense kind of pragmatist. But I think within him is this kind of messed up artist, you know, like a real kind of starving artist, like someone who will express kind of the minutiae of life and just a kind of sense of a feeling that he has within himself and do that
Well,
with
I mean,
without any
all of his
regard.
early movies are key texts in what I would call neo expressionism as a film
Yeah.
movement. Like, all of his stuff up until like Thelma and Louise is basically this style, right? It's
Yeah,
all everything's covered in smoke and rain and dirt, and everyone's kind of sweating, and like the texture of the film image is so unbelievably dense. And
yeah,
this movie, I mean, like truly is the height of that because every
yeah,
frame of this is so packed with bullshit. Like you get this
yeah,
almost
yeah,
like this like 19th century decadent novel idea of an image where it's almost like overripe and it's so it's so invested with beauty that the beauty almost becomes like it ceases to be about any individual thing and becomes about like the tapestry of beauty.
yeah. It's a really I really like that expression, no pun intended, neo-expressionism. I think that is a real kind of Rosetta Stone for a certain generation who grew up loving film, especially I suppose our generation. Just
Oh
like
yeah, yeah.
not like now. I mean, looking at the new Blade Runner, I can get on board with it to a certain degree, but there is just this again that this just very self-conscious kind of thing about it all that it's too controlled and it's I think the key to neo-expressionism is that it like you say things are dense and messy and you're just painting with kind of all different strokes and it's about an energy of like an artistic energy and that is something that is far too I don't know there's this kind of just restraint now that people are too sort of
Well,
self-conscious is the only
I
word for it.
I think well, if you want to get into the 2049 question already, I mean, look, people, if you want to
Yeah,
talk about the plot of the movie, like, you know what the fucking story is. I don't give a shit. This is us, like,
yeah,
doing commentary on Star Wars. You know what this fucking movie is. Like, we're not
yeah,
going to
yeah,
give you a
yeah,
plot summary. Like, you get it, right? Look up
yeah.
Wikipedia, whatever. Anyway, um,
Also, who cares when a film looks this nice? Who gives
yeah,
a shit?
yeah. Well, I mean, I'm going to get into the Philip K. Dickness of it
Yeah,
all
yeah, yeah,
later, but
yeah, for sure.
so what? Yeah, with what you talked about, I feel 24/9 is not like a terrible movie, but to me, it's got a fanficky feel to it,
Sure.
and which is I think unavoidable with a lot of these like nostalgic sequels or whatever. But it also it fundamentally feels like a less adventurous stylistic movie. You know what I mean? Like
Mm.
less stylistically adventurous because Denis Villeneuve is like I mean, whatever. Okay, if you're listening to the commentary, like this is probably maybe the time you want to turn it off. I just don't understand the appeal of him, and I
Yeah.
don't. His stuff is so aseptic to me, and it's so like, all right, we're in like an art gallery, and like here's a giant white wall and like some stuff painted. You know what I mean? Like it's like very
Yeah.
drawn back and much much more stark than this movie is. Like this
Mm.
movie, like we just we described it as lush. Like this movie is overwhelmingly romantic and European
Mm.
and uh 2049 it just feels like where this movie feels like jam packed with a whole bunch of shit. 2049 feels like it's spread really thin. Like it's an
Mm.
aesthetic that's spread so thin that it almost becomes like monotonous and like it's interesting like the Tarkovsky piece between these two movies because I feel like they both feel
Mm.
Tarkovskian in certain ways.
Yeah.
Um, but this is definitely the kind I prefer, where it's more like nostalgia, right? Where it's much more about like nostalgia of the movie, not the phenomenon. Uh,
Mm.
where you have like these like these this exploration of interior self through an exterior world,
Yeah.
and I feel like it's like when you say that about 2049, you're like, well, does that mean that it's like if you portray this hollowed out, spread out desert of a future, like, well, what does that say about your filmmaking style? I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
like people can have their own judgments of that, but it's just something that doesn't appeal to me as much as what this does, where it's like everything. It's smoke, it's blue light,
Mm.
it's harsh light and harsher darkness, and you just have like the the chiseled carpentry of Harrison Ford's face,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
getting drenched, and I just yeah, it's just so indelible to me that I imagine even if Ridley himself had directed 2049, maybe I would have had some similar feelings, but because he didn't, which
Mm,
to be honest, I think maybe he should have, like, for what it's worth. But
yeah.
um, yeah, I don't know. I don't want to make too big a deal of 2049 because I'm probably never going to do a
Sure.
commentary on that movie. But like, you obviously have your own take. I don't know. Like, what do you think?
Well, I think I enjoy 2049, and the thing I said to someone who, because, I kind of, a lot of people know how big of a deal this film is to me, much to their deep annoyance. But, so, people wanted, were always like, how do you feel about there being a sequel? And I thought, well, in all honesty, if Ridley's not going to do it, then I feel like this is probably the best option you're going to have in this day and age. This day and age being kind of run amok with just, the
Well,
kind
the
of J.J.
era of
Abrams of the world, like it's. I feel like if anyone's going to approach it, having Roger Deakins is probably your best shout, etc. But the problem I have with that film is it's too intended. It's too
well,
again,
it's
it's very
mannered,
much,
isn't it?
yeah, it's very conscious of this idea that it is a sequel to a film that has gained a kind of cult following. Like, people hated this original film when it came out; they really didn't
Well,
like it. The
also what
studio
I'll
didn't like
argue
making it.
too, I'll say this, like, what I think that 2049 misses is that this is like a pulp movie. Like, Philip K.
Yeah,
Dick is a pulp writer, and this is a movie
completely.
about like high concepts, like it's noir, right?
Yeah,
2049 is not a noir film. And not
no,
saying like whatever, like you have to copy the same thing verbatim. Like, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is I
sure.
think it misses some of the essence of what this is supposed to be.
Yeah,
And instead of like swinging hard into another direction, it just kind of swings limply in this
mm,
direction. And yeah, it's like there's no fucking like Coca-Cola billboard or like Atari billboard
yeah,
in
yeah,
2049. There's none of those like little details, or like, like him eating ramen in the police car. It's like that stuff's
yeah,
fun. I like that. It's human. Like, this movie feels so achingly, I mean, sorry, not to be cliche, but it does feel so achingly human to me. Like, it's
yeah,
so desperately concerned about like just these grand notions, but expresses them through small intimate gestures that are tangible and mean something to real people. And um like when she's later playing the piano and like she lets down
mm,
her hair, it's like these are human moments. Whereas
yeah,
2049 always feels like, all right, we're in kind of like a nebulous zone where like nothing, like humanity doesn't really enter the picture, even though that's supposed to be really, with that film, even more than this, what that film's even about. But
yeah.
yeah, sorry, I don't mean for this to come to like the 2049 bitch session.
No,
So
no, no. Just to sort of sum up, what I think the thing with 2049 is that if I was to describe it to you, that film 2049, you would have a very clear, you'd know exactly what you were going to see, and you'd be right just on description alone. If I tried to describe this film to you, you could have no idea. The only way to know is to see it, and
because
that's
it's
the
a
kind of.
visual experience.
Exactly. That's the kind of intangible quality that Ridley brings to this. I have to just say, this shot through the window in this office scene is absolutely my favorite shot of.
Unreal.
It just fucking kills me every time. Like, it is just
Well, what
impossible.
pisses me off is that all of Ridley's movies look good. You know what I mean? Like, he never
Yeah,
has a bad looking movie. Like, and like this is like exceptional
truly.
even by his standards, and you're like,
Yeah.
holy shit.
Yeah, I mean, where he's getting this from, when you read about this film, like the history of making
Well,
this film,
he
like,
talks about like he conceived of it basically as like a comic book, but like not in the way
mm,
that we would nowadays, where like he was much more interested in like the pop art, like
yeah, Mobius stuff.
um yes, that like the
Mm,
kind of the hyper real
yeah,
detail of such images. It's like here, right, where so you have this space, and you have all like the water reflections on
yeah.
here, and you're like, where's the water coming from? It's like, who gives a fuck?
Yeah.
It looks so amazing.
I mean, this is the thing. If you have you ever seen there's the 3.5 hour documentary about making this film, and if you haven't seen it, I super recommend it because it's so good. It's really, really fascinating, and like everybody around him just challenged him on everything. He's like, "Why do you want water reflections? Why is the sun out now and it's always raining? Why is there smoke everywhere? Why this? Why does the Esper machine bend photographs?" And he's like, like his whole production process is just shut the fuck up and let me get on with it, because he can
Yeah.
see, he sees all these things. Like
Well,
he
to me, I mean,
sees,
that's why he's my favorite director, is that he's,
yeah,
he has the force of will to be like, no, like, I know what I fucking want. And if you
yeah,
will just, if you will just literally acquiesce and work with me for like,
yeah,
2.5 seconds, this will be the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. Like,
yeah,
it's, it's like, he's like the pure definition of, a visual artist to me. And
yeah,
I feel like out of his entire, if you want to call like that generation, like the post New Hollywood generation, I mean,
mm,
like, okay, like anyone, like who has a better, maybe not, okay, maybe someone has a better list of films, but like better films, like pound for pound, if you
yeah,
compare them. Like, I'm sorry, like this and Alien, and
back to
I would
back.
I would even argue Legend to some extent.
Oh, I
Like,
love Legend. Completely
put
love Legend.
put any other
Yeah,
director's best movie up against these, it's hard. Like, it's a
yeah,
hard competition. Like, fucking, I mean, I just did a commentary of Kingdom of Heaven, and it's like, dude, that stands up as
yeah,
much as anything. It's perfect. It looks perfect. It feels perfect. It's got an amazing cast, and it's like Ridley kind of gets pigeonholed, I think, as this like, oh, he's just a craftsman. He just does. It's like, no. You're not a
yeah,
fucking, like, this guy is not like Raoul Walsh or whatever the fuck. Like,
yeah,
he's executing a vision on such a high level,
yeah,
and like, if it works or not, like, that's up to your personal thing. But it's like, he has the capability for just these immense exercises, and like the world wasn't prepared for this movie.
no,
And now it seems like, oh, obviously Blade Runner. It's like, no, man, this shit, like, it's like Ridley saw effectively what the future was gonna fucking be, and only the rest of us caught up with it. Where,
yeah,
I mean, I think like a huge part of this that's also in the original Philip K. Dick story is like the animals being extinct, and
yeah,
like all these fake animals being created. I guarantee you that will fucking happen. That shit will
yeah.
fucking happen.
Oh,
Maybe
completely,
within our
yeah,
lifetimes. Like,
yeah,
it's not going to be science fiction. And like right now, I mean, with the most obvious stuff, with the AI stuff, look,
mm,
man, you're gonna have actual like Blade Runners being like, all right, like, I need to test, like, was this made by a person, or was this, was this text
yeah.
written by an
Before
AI?
it comes
And
stuff, yeah,
guess what? It's gonna be fucking hard. It's gonna be
yeah,
exactly what's in this movie, and you'll have these
yeah,
big language models which are gonna like fucking impersonate this or that. And it's gonna be a struggle, and like, like, I mean, what Ridley is tackling here is like, perhaps I would argue in some ways like the essential question of what's going to emerge over the next decade
yeah,
is, all right, man, like, we created something, like, what are the implications of that, and like, are we going to act like this is, a threat, or can it be something positive? And the answer is always like all those things, right? um but in a way, like, the struggle through that is what this movie is about. It's like, you don't just come to the realization that it's like, oh, they're really humans. It's like, it's a violent struggle to just recognize something for what it is. And
mm,
um yeah, I don't know, I mean, like, I think that could describe a lot of Ridley's movies as like the violent struggle for recognition in some ways.
yeah,
Like Alien kind of being this all these like concerns of like 70s feminism and the working class politics of the time, just being put up against the absolute like neoliberal death grind machine where it's like, you will be fucking
yeah,
devoured. I
yeah,
mean, and it's like the xenomorph now, like, that's every fucking corporation. Like, we're looking at the
yeah,
strikes right now. Look, it's, it's about as real as it gets. Like, every company is now Whalen Yutani. There's, like, we're fully back to the 1890s, robber barons and all that nonsense. Like, it's definitely here.
yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to rant for too much, but
No, please run away. Um,
yeah.
um,
So with this stuff where we're at, I remember one of the commentaries, like, that there was a complaint with Ridley where like people were like, oh, Tecker doesn't do enough detecting in
yeah,
this movie. I think it was from Harrison Ford, actually. It really was
yeah,
like,
yeah,
sure, let's go back and shoot some more stuff with like detecting, I guess. Like that's how
Mm.
little concerned with like the fucking plot he was in this fucking movie.
Yeah.
And God bless him for it. Like what I love is
Yeah.
just that there's so much that is just fucking implied and mysterious and
Yeah.
stuff that gets usually ironed out in the American Hollywood bullshit machine of like any ambiguity gets erased. Anything that's like interesting, okay, throw out the window because we in the marketing team believe that Joe Schmo in Iowa won't understand it. It's like, fuck you, man. This is a movie. This doesn't answer any fucking questions for you. And you're gonna have to make up your own fucking mind and be a human being and exercise your reason and your intuition and your feelings, right? And like it's not, I mean, this is, again, this is closer to fucking Tarkovsky than it is to I don't know, like fucking Lethal Weapon or whatever nonsense. I mean, I like Lethal Weapon, but like,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know,
I know what you mean.
the kind of stuff that basically led to the situation that we have today. And I think uh fuck, I wish there were more fucking films like this because this is so in the pocket for me because it's like genre, it's dark, it's moody,
Mm.
and it's a high tier artist taking on like another artist who is also exceptional but in a very different way, and like the melding of these two different things creates such a potent force. um I mean, like, just look at this shit, like like look at, like, literally you have a non sequitur jump cut to him like coiling his fist
I fucking
while
love
he
that
said,
shot.
well, he says time enough. Like that is
Yeah.
the movie in a nutshell. Like
Yeah.
it's like he's using like the film technique of the past 20 years to just accelerate it into this vision of the future where you have all these people like living. I mean, it's the same thing that Godard does in Breathless, right? It's all about
Mm.
these characters who live in a kind of like a post World War II world where everything is debased and everything is corporatized and everything has been, you know, turned into a hegemony. And you're like just basically presented with a complete existential quandary of like, what the fuck do you fucking do? Like,
Mm.
how do you spend your existence? Like, there's no greater question because everything else has been like destroyed, devalued, and so it becomes up to the individual to really do the Nietzschean reevaluation of every single thing. And that's a
Mm.
titanic question. It's like, how the fuck do you do that? There's no single answer. And like in this movie is about like finding like a person finding one answer, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, that's why partially I think it's so important because it confronts the real uh like social and spiritual issues of our time where you're not just kind of like, glib, we're just bouncing around in fictional movie world and everything's fun and light and, you know, whatever. It's like, no, this is a movie about fucking a guy who like his only out from fucking suicide is basically like being told to kill other people, and another man who's like destined to die, like doing everything he can to get the fuck out of there and like not understanding the world that he's been born into, which has been so far hostile and
Mm.
hateful to him. Like, this is about as real as it gets, man.
For real. I think one of the great, just to go back to something you were saying before, just about kind of like Ridley and his approach, and specifically within this film, is I think he just gets that, like on a deep level, that art and commerce are not separate things, and that telling a story, there is a kind of an implicit intuition within. Like people always talk about with Christopher Nolan, like, oh well, he's so brilliant, is he? Because he trusts that an audience is so clever, and it's like he doesn't at all. But that's beside the point, you know. Like Ridley is someone who really trusts that an audience like can use an artistic medium, respond to what he's putting out, you know, like an image like a fist coiling up, and that's such a powerful image, and there's so much in there. And you know, with the words over it, that the world he makes is like this incredible like corporate encroachment, but also the Tyrell Corporation has this kind of like self-validating sense of opulence. You know, they have these kind of big meeting rooms, and they're like very different from the world. Like he trusts that you put all this in and you get that. For him, I'm sure it's that kind of hit, that like artistic
Well,
hit, that
like
you've created
at no
something, but
point
there's
in
something
this
in that.
movie does he tell you like the corporations are in bed with the police. But like
Exactly. Yeah.
that's literally what's going on here. And like that's
Yeah.
the fucking existence that we live in now. Like it's like Ridley yeah, he does have faith in the viewer to just not have their hand held through every single fucking thing and need to be
Yeah.
exposited. I mean, this is a movie designed for rewatches and it rewards them so much.
He also doesn't really, and I know there's the bit at the beginning with the captain when they're sitting and watching the screens, and the captain basically just sets the whole thing up. I think that's really the only exposition that like this film bothers with. But he doesn't really do the thing of like showing you that Rutger Hauer is this kind of assassin. He just kind of gets straight to that like torturous existential thing, which Rutger Hauer just plays like incredibly
Because
well.
there was a thing in the beginning with that, and he was like, yeah, cut that shit out. We don't need it.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like who
Like, we're
cares,
just
you
gonna
know?
have
Like
him walk into the film like he's
yeah,
a character out of a Leone movie with a trench coat, just
exactly. Yeah.
like a complete mystery. You're just gonna figure that shit out. Um, okay, and that thing with the exposition in the beginning, that used to like
Mm.
somewhat bug me when I first watched it. And like
What they was
watching this movie
there.
so many times, I realized like, oh wait a second, this motherfucker has probably had his brain wiped to some
Yeah.
extent every time he's gone on like one of these like murder hunt kill sprees, and he probably in some way needs it re-explained to him. Like
Mm.
it's like such a sinister thing that you only really understand after you finish the movie. And I don't know, at least that's my interpretation. Oh, here
Yeah.
we have the classic, the LA tunnel. I don't know what this place is called because I've never been to LA,
Yeah, it
but
shows up in
this
lots of stuff.
this tunnel is in so many movies. If you watch any
Yeah.
movies, listener, like please, like look at this tunnel. You will fucking. It's in Terminator. It's in. I think it's another Rutger Hauer movie. It's called Split Second. I think it's also in that.
Mm. That's a great movie actually, Split Second. Like
See,
what?
look, really such a fucking genius because that shot, that beautiful shot with the matte painting,
Yeah.
to cover that shit up, he just puts a searchlight that moves throughout the frame, like, and
Yeah.
it looks perfect. Like there's no flaw in the image. There's
Yeah.
none of it.
The lens
It's
flare. Yeah.
I
It's
like I it's like simple stuff that he does, but it's simple stuff that only an artist like him would think of. Like nowadays, that's kind of like yada yada yada. Who gives a fuck? Just like render everything in perfect, immaculate, exactly how you want it,
yeah.
and it's all concept art. This movie like is not that. It's like it's a movie of yeah, pragmatic choices made by a romantic artist, and
Yeah. I think that's a
um
very good way of putting it.
also his fucking his apartment, oh god, like the wall texture gives me such anxiety. I don't know why. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like the way that his
Completely, yeah.
like it I if I ran my hand across it, I would feel like, oh, this is a bad feeling.
I mean, I have just always wanted his apartment. Like that's the situation I want. That's the impossible dream is I just want to live. I mean, I don't know why it would not be a nice place to live.
Well,
Like it's
because it's
dark.
coated in darkness. There's beer bottles everywhere.
Yeah,
He
it's
doesn't do
like a
his dishes in
cave.
the sink.
It's like this weird kind of cavern that he lives in, you know, with just it's sort of really primal. It's like very elemental. But I just fucking love it. Like
It's
because
almost
it's
like a
designed by
man-made
Ridley.
cave, right? Like
Yeah.
it's like geometric and all these things. And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, because my what I always thought, it was like, man, he's probably come back here so many times. And it's like, I didn't think that I left this kind of mess. And
Mm.
like, because he's had his memory wiped, he's like, it's like, fuck, like, what am I even, you know what I mean? Like, there's like stuff in here from like the last time that he was out and about where he's like, all
Yeah.
right, well, just garbage. And it's like, it could be like a photo of someone, it could be like, like something that's like meaningful, right? And he'd just be like, okay, he just kind of
This piece.
lives. I mean, it's like the ultimate like quote unquote postmodern thing where like no one has a home, no one lives anywhere. He's kind of like a
Yeah.
nomad.
Yeah. I think there is again. I think this is really is just sort of like the key to unlocking kind of I guess 80s postmodernism, like the kind of continuation of
Well,
just this
especially
sort
like
of
the
stretch of
whole
existence.
academic idea, I think was very invested in this movie in particular.
Yeah.
I so this is so important to me because this is like the ultimate PKD thing.
Yeah.
The him relating her own memories to her is like and like her reaction to it is so beautiful.
Yeah.
Like Sean Young plays this so amazingly, and like people who criticize her in this movie, like fuck off. Like she's amazing, she's cool.
Yeah.
Um,
He's really good.
she, what I love here is that like almost every single Philip K. Dick book that I've read, and all the adaptations are all about this central quandary: is that when your interior life becomes externalized, like and can be like systematically done so, like what happens to the world? What happens when your sense of self is disrupted, like you're isolated, like this idea of like the Cartesian, like, oh, I am trapped in my mind and I interact with my body like a robot, and okay, I
Mm.
go through here and like, but I have my, you know, my internal mind and my soul, and I've got all that, and it's like mine alone, essentially, which is like basically been the conceit of like most of Western philosophy and thinking for the past 500 years. And like what Philip K. Dick's fiction explores a lot is um, like in books like Valis, it's like, well, what if I get like a premonition of something happening, and like because like that in that it's kind of based off his biography where he had a metaphysical experience with like this ray of light, and like he had a
Mm.
message like told to him where it's like, oh yeah, your son like has a sickness, like there's like a specific thing wrong with him. And
Mm.
he went to the doctor, and because like he didn't know about this, he's like, hey, can you give my son a checkup? And it turns out his son had that very specific thing.
Right.
And it's like that Philip K. Dick had that experience so many times in his life, and he interpreted it in like a very like a searching, skeptical, religious way where he never quite came to a singular answer. But in his fiction, he's exploring all these answers where, yeah, if like in this movie, if I can tell you, Tomo, if I can tell you what your deepest, most hidden memories are,
Mm.
like, uh, like what does that make your memories? And then, like if I can
Yeah.
tell them to you in a way where it doesn't require you telling me about them,
Yeah.
if I could just know these things as a matter of like public record, um, and like everyone's in the know but you, right? First, that leads
Mm.
to paranoia. Secondly, it leads to you being like, well, like what does that experience even matter? Because like what
Mm.
separates me from any other person when I'm just an easily replicable? Because like like memories are just if they're just supposed to be like the DNA of the mind, right? If it's literally just like, okay, well that's arbitrary and we can analyze that and da 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 da, and your sense of self, oh, it just functions according to brain neurons and all this horseshit. Like, okay, so if like we can just reduce the human being down to like the barest existence possible, then like, okay, well, who gives a shit? Like what is stopping you from like the Camusian idea of like, all right, well, you might as well fucking kill yourself then, right? Like it's like
Yeah.
this like deeply important question that this film deals with, where it's like, yeah, like why are you living if your entire life can be quantified in that
Mm.
way, and if your subjective world is rendered useless by the objective world, and like what do we make of a society and of an existence that does that, right? Like is that a place where it like is Blade Runner, is this world in this fictional 2019, is this a place that's conducive to the idea of like human life and human dignity? Not really. Like look, she's sleeping in the fucking garbage, it's like, all
Yeah.
right, so this is and I think through this refraction we end up seeing like, well, is our world really uh, hospitable towards the human race? And I think the answer is increasingly more and more no. And that like we've created a world that is essentially anti-human, and anti humane, and against things which give us the right and the meaning to live, and that's a real ass problem.
Yeah. I mean, I think what you're saying for me is really what the film, if I have to define it in terms of what it is about, for me it is that it is about existing in a world where what is important to you and how your internal life is part of a kind of external commodity. it's a world. This is a world where a balloon travels over you, intermittently going, "A new life awaits you elsewhere." That's literally like the opening of the film is a giant blimp saying that this world is useless and garbage, and you are useless and garbage in it, and we utilize you and we copy you and we take your memories and put them elsewhere. It is about that kind of like just that implosion of personal meaning. I mean, it's about a lot
Well,
of
and
things.
like what's the off world, right? It's literally
We never see it,
slaves. It's
We
but it's literally like that's where they're from, right? They're from
yeah.
outside the planet. So like the replicants, in addition to being machines, they're also in a way aliens, right? Like
Mm,
they're they're coming to this place like totally disassociated from anything into it, and it's, I mean, that gets into like this larger bit that I have with the movie where you have like the symbolism of the serpent and the dove,
mm,
and the contrasting, the idea of like you have the upper world, which is kind of like the Tyrell, the space colonies, like the pyramids, the ascended kind of Egyptian grandeur of that. You have the
mm,
blimps, right? And when you have that, it's associated with birds, owls, doves. It's like it's all very like the idea of like like the Christian uh salvation, right? Like the dove with the fig leaf.
mm-hmm.
And whenever you get down to here, most of the film is set, you're in like this like quasi hell world that's ruled by like the imagery of the serpent, right? Where he's going after the woman, with the idea of like her snake show, right? And
Yeah,
he gets the serpents, the like the artificial idea of the scale that's being
yeah,
manufactured, and like there's all these like neon dragons everywhere that are always like leering downwards, and like
yeah. That's
their
pretty cool.
tongues are forked and they're electric, like, so it's like you have like this transcendent like world of like, okay, here's where the gods reside and here's where transcendence is possible,
Mm,
and then uh here is the other world where you kind of live in like the demiurge hellscape of like everything is an Ouroboros. Like you have this repetition, like memories are arbitrary, the self is arbitrary,
mm,
everything's shit and dark and evil, and people are broken, and it's an intensely Gnostic movie in that way because Philip K. Dick is a very Gnostic writer,
yeah,
and like I really appreciate that really keyed into all that symbolism, which is not really in the short story, but like really brought that into there,
yeah,
and I love him like really taking command of that esoteric quality of the movie where um you're not just getting like, it's not just like, oh, this is like science fiction, this is like supposed to be a predictive idea of what the future is. It's also, it's like a metaphysical space. It's a space where like certain souls are trapped in this purgatory realm, and like only at the end of the film when he lets the dove go does it feel like, oh, but like now his soul like has escaped from like the
yeah.
torment of what's happening here. And uh oh yeah, here we go with the the infamous
Speaking
unicorn
of
stuff.
metaphysical,
Yes, yes.
yeah. See, I never had a problem with this. People have these. These are the things that I just can't get on board with. Other
Now
people
people who
is
bitch and moan
saying,
about this are fucking stupid.
I just
Unicorn
like
school.
it doesn't. It's like if you have issues like this, you're missing the point, and I don't want to talk to you about this film. Like legit, I just don't.
Yeah,
Like, there is
yeah.
something like you say that all those things you say. It's like there is something more going
Well,
on here.
well,
It's not
I'll tell
about
you, like
detective
personally,
solve
like
robot
to
crimes.
describe myself, like literally, like this is a film that separates the wheat from the chaff. Okay, it separates
Completely.
the those who
The
get it
ultimate
and those
pleb
who
food
don't.
filter.
And guess what? I was one of the plebs who once got filtered by this movie, so like I
Oh,
know what
right.
that means, right? Oh
Right.
no, this is my favorite bit. I love this shit so much. This bit with the computer. So
Yeah.
this is like, okay, I wouldn't have come to this insight before this year. This is like something out of a Raul Ruiz film.
Yeah.
Like it reminds me so much of like the hypothesis of the stolen painting where the guy like keeps stepping into the painting, but within the painting is another fragment of a painting, and like,
Right.
you know what I mean, like it's like he's like, oh, let's go inside that, and then he goes into it, like this is like that scene. And like this, I don't know, like this to me, it's like he's operating like almost like he's like a director in this. He's like Ridley. This is
Mm.
like a Ridley like imposing
Analog. Yeah.
like what a director does, right? Because he's like panning in and out, but in
Yeah.
a way he's also editing and like making shot choices, right? Because each of them are still frames. And I just love like so much of like what this scene represents, but it's also like very
Mm.
funny in as much as like you're trying to think like how would this work? And the
Yeah.
answer is that it works, you know, again in a spiritual way, not in a technological way.
I think my advantage with this film when I was very young is I was a very stupid kid. So stuff like this, I was like, oh yeah, of course.
You were
I'm
like, yeah,
sure
you
you
could do
can do
this,
that.
you could do
Yeah,
this.
I'm letting you do that. And I found this whole scene really compelling. I was like, shit, what is he going to find? If you can go around the corner in a photograph in the future, you could literally find anything. That's like the
well,
ultimate
well,
detecting, you know?
but that's the thing, right? Is that I mean, like that's such a thing in Philip K. Dick too. It's like you can
Mm.
really find anything, like
Yeah.
if you look hard enough for it. And I think that's like kind of a great thing that this scene keys into, where yeah, because like the detail keeps getting more and more enhanced, and it just keeps
Yeah.
getting more like it's like the the granularity of the image is infinite,
Mm.
and like that's such a like you got to think like that's what a filmmaker does, right? Like this is like a pure filmmaker scene
Yeah.
where really just like like him panning from within the refraction of the mirror to
Yeah.
like to try and see her like and you're like
Only Ridley would think like that, I think.
this
Only
again,
he
this is
would make that
something
choice.
you can't do in a novel. You can't do this shit in a novel or in a
Yeah.
fucking play. This is not what this movie is about. This is a movie about pure cinema, okay?
Mm.
And if you don't get it, then you reject pure cinema is what I'm saying. Also,
Yeah.
I love the fucking Polaroid. He
Oh,
goes prints it out, and it's like the worst quality of the
oh
world.
shit. Like fucking useless to a detective. Like you show people and it's just not gonna make it
But there's something
great.
about almost like because you've seen like the higher version of it on the computer, there's something almost
Mm.
cool about like him having to like it's like in the process of making it physical in a way he like destroys some of it. You know,
Yeah.
there's something to that. I just yeah, sorry, like it's such a weird scene to obsess about, but I truly do.
No, it's a perfect scene to obsess about. I think there is
Oh my
so
god,
much to obsess about in
this
this.
fucking like Evangelist like Dead Can Dance ass
Yeah.
score.
I haven't even
Dude,
talked about the score. I feel like there is a missing piece in my relationship to this film is that it was on cassette in the car when I was really, really, really young. So all those
oh
cues, which are incredible, I mean, on their own, if you come to this at any age, I still think they're incredibly evocative. And people are kind of like, you know, the Chariots of Fire theme is a little bit of a joke now for just any kind of slow motion running sequence. It's kind of been like, but I still find that piece of music like
well,
incredibly
it's a good
moving.
piece of music. It's not its fault that it
Yeah.
was made into a cliche.
No, no, no. Yeah, I like irrespective of any kind of subsequent usage. I still think like just the way like Ridley talks about in the documentary about how Vangelis approaches scoring every film is that he is so obsessed with like details, and he's like, I'm gonna start this piece of percussion as soon as someone blinks, and as soon as someone blinks, I'm gonna play this keyboard, and that's gonna score what's going on. Like it just completely like in sync with the rhythms of the film. And this is a film which is, I think there are examples probably later on of just like, you know, it's musical in a way. Like it's not a
Well, okay.
musical,
I
but it
mean, look,
feels musical, you know?
Ridley made like thousands of commercials before he ever became a director. Like
Yeah.
the art of the commercial is a syncopated idea of rhythm to you know like marrying audio and visual,
Mm.
right? And that's I think with like what a lot of neo expressionist directors do, where they're intensely musical in that way, and they're interested in needle drops and interested in the score and um yeah, I mean, like, look at fucking Highlander. You know what I mean? Like, that's a movie
Yeah.
where it's inseparable from the music. You can't divorce it from it. It's just, it's one. And that's what I also feel about this. And I really miss that. Movies don't have, I mean, there are great scores. Like, I love the Justin Hurwitz, like, score for Babylon that came out last
Mm.
year. But, like, it's not, it's not like this where there's just a complete, like, merger between the two, and it all feels of a whole. Also, I love this. Okay, like this is a director's choice. He's like framing a conversation from the outside of a shop where you were hearing like the echoes of the voices,
Mm.
and then we also see like all the
The
people
neon coming
moving
in.
on
Yeah.
the outside, obscuring the reflections of the neon on the window. Like, think about how dense that image is. That's
Yeah.
like not like that's a Ridley being like, all right, how do we spice this shit up? How do we make this fucking shit look good? And it's incredible. And like, truly, like, who's doing that today outside of fucking him? No one is. No one's doing that shit.
I these details that we talk about, I think this is the stuff that just when I was young just clued me in to this idea that I want to direct, that it was like I want, like, I can't explain, is like I don't want to replicate reality. I don't want to stage kind of things that are happening as though they are real, as I want to like live in the ephemeral, for lack of a better term. I want to kind
Well,
of,
but
take
you want
fractions.
to. I would challenge that. I think what you're talking about is that you want to broaden the definition of what is considered real.
Sure.
I think that's
Yeah.
what every great filmmaker tries to do in some way, is
Mm.
to broaden the space of quote unquote reality. Because I think
Yeah.
the reality that gets sold to us is a bunch of contrived bullshit. It really is.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's an ideological set of promotion materials that are designed to sell you a
Yeah.
certain thing. And I
Sure.
think with Ridley, with his art, what he does, he says like, all right, like, this crazy, sci-fi future. Like, oh, yeah, what if this was really? I mean, if you think about it, outside of like some aesthetic qualities, it's not that different from now. And like he was saying in
Yeah.
the '80s, and like now it's like it's kind of unquestionable to me. It's like, no, this is almost like it's like I think the more and more it goes on, the more that fantasy cinema and sci-fi cinema take on a documentary like quality.
Yeah.
And like I like when I watch like Powell and Pressburger movies, like they feel way more real to me than any amount of kitchen sink Oscar bait dramas do.
Yeah, completely.
Because they realize that like a part of our reality is fantastical stuff. Weird shit happens. The
Yeah.
world is not mundane, right? Like mundane is a constructed idea
Mm.
by certain power structures. And what a movie like this really realizes, that it's like the fantasy itself had its own reality. Like this part right here, this is a perfect example where he's talking to her on like the VIP phone, where
Yeah.
there's such a great detail. It's like the he's calling her on it, and you expect, oh, it's the future, right? So he just calls her. It's like, but it has graffiti on it. It's got all this, like, it's got gum
Yeah.
attached to it. Like, it's like a real like public phone, and so it's
Yeah.
gonna be marked up with a whole bunch of shit. And like, you're like, yeah, of course. Like, it's like, but only Ridley would be like, yeah, let's put that in there because that makes it feel tangible.
Mm. I think just talking, because you mentioned Powell and Pressburger, and it's quite an apt comparison
Oh,
because
I didn't even think about that.
they're not necessarily, I suppose, neo-expressionism. There is like an incredibly expressionistic nature to there. And Powell and Pressburger, they come from a very kind of austere, probably quite, maybe not prosaic era of British cinema, but from a kind of background that is not. I mean, they would have to really introduce a lot of things into the British filmmaking landscape to make some of their visions work. And I think the idea, like just what we were talking about, the relationship between reality as it's given to us and what a movie reality represents, is that idea of personal fantasy, kind of like longing and wants, and how that generates visually within us, and how we envision our kind of personal fantasy and like what we want for our own lives and the possibility of our own lives, and how we kind of envision that. And certain people just reject that and choose to live like completely in the now, for lack of a better term, and will, everything as presented is all they want, and it just becomes this kind of
Well, it's
cyclical
the
nightmare.
tyranny of common sense, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly that. And I guess, yeah, I was just, I mean, I saw this when I was very young, so it just, for me, it was all about fantasy. Like, I loved movies, and I loved the idea of
Well,
possibility. Like,
but
I loved
also,
the
I mean,
idea of
I
watching
think what a movie
TV.
like this shows is that even quote unquote grounded, realistic movies are not like they themselves are fantasies as well.
Yeah.
Like there's no
Yeah.
difference. Like everything in art is a fantasy, and that's okay. That's what you have to lean into. You can't run away
Yeah.
from it. So wait, hold on. So this part with this scene,
I love
Harrison
his
Ford
voice.
in his, I
Yeah.
love him doing the fucking nerdy, like, yeah, actually, I'm a
Yeah.
reporter. Like,
Or
I
this
love
Jerry
that shit.
Lewis kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, also, what's so funny about it to me is he also does this in like several movies, most notably in
Yeah.
Last Crusade, where he does
Oh
his
yeah.
fucking god awful Scottish accent. I'm here to see the tapestries. Like it's like, oh my god, like, he's so funny. I like what I like about Harrison Ford is that because we haven't talked about him so far in this commentary. What I
No,
love
yeah.
is that he's kind of like to me, it's like he's like the ultimate movie star
Yeah.
because he can play
Completely.
so many different facets because he's there's like a part of him where it's like he's kind of like a little bit of a cad, he's a little bit of an asshole, he's a little bit of a
Mm,
cool guy, he's a little bit of like a jerk, but not too much of a jerk. But also he can play like authentically threatening. Like there's several times
yeah.
in this movie where you're like he's going to like do something terrible.
Yeah.
And like in this upcoming scene that we're about to see.
Mm,
But like I think I kind of regret that he didn't work more with Ridley because I think he makes such a great uh protagonist for the kind of world that Ridley creates. He's very damaged in this. He's
yeah.
very like but he's very plucky, and there's a soft like childlike quality to him, just like the replicants have. And if you want to get into
Mm,
like whether he's a replicant or whatever, maybe this could be evidence in that, but I'm not going to say this or that about that. But like yeah, he's like a child in this movie.
mm,
He's just like kind of like stumbling around. Like there's with a noir there's almost always this expression of like the protagonist trying to figure out what the world is about, right? And oftentimes with noir protagonists, it could be like, well, I know everything and I'm cynical and I'm wise to the ways of everything,
yeah.
like whatever. Like it's kind of like that disabused adolescent notion of false wisdom.
Mm,
Whereas what I like in here is that you feel in a way as lost as he does within this labyrinth. And he doesn't he's like so there's a delicacy to him. There's like a part of him where you feel like, oh, you know what, man? Like this world has essentially like created a man like this who like he doesn't know what he wants. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's just like drifting throughout this cacophony of. I mean, like literally in this scene, like he's just moving throughout this crowd and just is looking for any semblance of purpose. And
mm,
it's like in that kind of situation, when someone puts a gun in your hand, it's all too easy to just go and kill someone because you believe like, well, okay, in a world without any purposes, at least I can have a purpose if you tell me to do something, right? And
yeah.
I think it's almost like an automatic reaction, right? It's very childish in that way where you don't think about again the context of what's going on. You just think of like, all right, what is the efficient way for me to do this thing? And that's a very dangerous way to think.
I think like I'm glad that Harrison Ford hated making this film because it imbues him with this weariness, like that just amplifies everything going on. Because the replicants are all, Pris is kind of childlike, Batty is like super introspective, and Zora is kind of like exotic and violent in that way, and very kind of vibrant. And he just, I don't know, they're like I never really think on the question of is he a replicant or is he not. I think there is just he has a relationship to this world and the products of this world, i.e., replicants, in that he is the one who retires them. And he just gives like he just does so much with like very little. Like I love we didn't talk about before the scene which I definitely think is the key scene when he is explaining the memories to Rachel is he just has this weariness about it, like that's such an important scene about someone relaying your kind of memories, and he does it with this kind of like tired, sort of fed up, almost depressive energy that it's just impossible to like try and act unless you have that kind of in you. I mean, yeah, he is, I think, pretty as movie stars go, pretty hard. We not just really unlikely to get that again at his level. There's
Oh
something
yeah,
just
because
very
I think a lot of modern stars are way too self conscious and way too much about like
hugely.
themselves as a persona as a brand. And with Harrison Ford, you always get the impression he's like, listen, I could be doing other things, but I kind of looked into this, so
Yeah,
I'm trying to do my best. And
yeah,
um, yeah, God, this whole scene that we just talked over, I mean, like, fuck, it doesn't
yeah,
get much more haunting than this.
yeah.
It's this really grim, horrible stuff. But I like is that it's again, it's like you live in a hermetically sealed environment. It's
Mm,
the snow that's like entering. Like the weather doesn't mean anything. Everything feels like so canned, and there's like no spontaneity in the world. Like everything, it's
mm,
like he's going to kill her. It's just going to happen no matter how far she runs. And like she shatters into a million
yeah.
different reflections in her jacket and with the glass, and it just
Mm,
becomes. It's like she almost like disperses her life into neon and into the snow, and just like all of it like leaves in the sense that it's like her soul is composed of light itself in cinematic terms as well as
that image, you're
whatever
right.
terms in
I
the
really
movie.
love that image when she's like lying amongst the glass. I mean, that's it. Is that you can just take an image like that for 5 seconds and it tells you everything you just said. I feel like really knows that you're going to get that out of an image that just shows this kind of shattered, broken glass and this woman just lying dead-eyed. Like everything you need is in that. Like if you want answers about like anything else, it's just meaningless. It's pointless. Like this is Ridley's great strength.
Yeah, and
That
I
gap.
also just love how it's like its first reaction to like like killing someone in this movie is just like I need to fucking have a drink. Like like fuck
Yeah,
this. Like this is
yeah,
bad.
yeah. Gaff is a really interesting character. Like to this day, and I've seen this
So
film
to me,
thousands of
he's
times.
what I like about Edward James Olmos with him in this. He's the rift in the movie.
Mm,
Like he's the god presence. Like really like beyond even Tyrell. Like Tyrell is like the demiurge presence,
yeah.
like the creator god. Like in here with like whenever Edward James almost shows up here, you feel like I mean, he's the only thing in the film that's not explained. Because even if you want to take like the whole like Decker is a replicant kind of thing, okay, sure, you have an answer there. What the fuck is he? You know,
Yeah.
like what like it's because you're like, okay, well, how does he know what he knows? Like he's like because he's you know he's supposedly a part of the police here, but like you don't really see him do anything outside of just like show up to Deckard, almost like a guardian angel in some ways, and
Yeah.
just like kind of like pop out of nowhere. And I don't know, he doesn't have oh my god, and okay, that frame that Ridley just did, where it's
Mm,
like he literally like jump cut her into the crowd,
yeah.
like
Insane.
it's almost like like it's like in a video game when like a character will just spawn in somewhere
Yeah.
and like it's like instantaneous appearance, but like using the film language, again, it feels so like mysterious and eerie.
Mm. I think that frame, I love how she's not really framed at all. It's almost like she doesn't know she's being filmed. Like he's
Yes, it
just
feels
almost like
incidental.
B-roll. That's I think really magic. There's a character in the David Thewlis character in Kingdom of Heaven. He's kind of like the Gaff of Kingdom of Heaven. I love those kind of just like
Ooh,
overseers, in Ridley's films. These stories just have these. I mean, I know David Thewlis. My Kingdom of Heaven memory is a little bit fuzzy, so you might be able to fill the gaps better than me. But he just sort of appears sometimes. He's just kind of there, and there is
yes.
this
Well,
real
and then
sense of
he's the
presence.
only one who he's the only one in that who kind of like radically affirms like his radical affirmation of the situation and of his death
Mm,
kind of like inspires Orlando Bloom to be like, okay, well, I must do what I feel is right. Like if this guy has
yeah.
the conviction to do it, then I must also take action. And
Mm,
yeah, you point that out. Yeah, this bit with the idea of like the interceptor, right? The the individual in the film who seems to like both is within it but is also outside of it.
Mm.
and is coated in mystery. I mean, like, isn't this also Ash in Alien, right? Like,
Yeah.
isn't this
Although
like? Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that this is a very bad comparison, but it works in kind of film language similar to the way a Greek chorus works. Is and I feel like Ash
Oh
is more
yeah, no, I think that's a good
definitively.
comparison.
I feel like Ash is more definitively in the kind of, for lack of a better word, the drama of the film. Like he's
Well,
sort of
the
playing.
milieu, right? He's
Like
a
Gaff
part of it.
doesn't really do anything. He just sort of drives Deckard around, but like his presence is huge. Like his presence is insane. Like when he shows up at the end and just leaving these little bits around, there's
But to me,
like
it's like
so much more under that.
he's the indicator that there is a way out of like this hell
Yeah,
maze that has been created. Like he's the kind of guy who's like, I mean, like him leaving that at the end, like
yeah,
in a way, it opens the way for an escape, and it opens the way for hope and for affirming human life. And um, yeah, see, and okay, like this whole I don't know, like I want to like ask about like what you think concerning uh their relationship here,
mm,
because I remember the first time I saw the movie, I was kind of like, I was put off by it. But the more and
mm,
more I watched like noir films and frankly like films that had a more adult sensibility to them, it's like if you watch this movie and you think that like Harrison Ford is like trying to play like Indiana Jones good guy, like I think you're really truly missing the point. And what I like about this movie is that, like their relationship in a way is like it's like two people discovering how to feel emotions for the first time.
yeah,
And like it's not like it's not a figured out thing. It's messy. It's contradictory. It's perhaps even a little scary.
mm,
And I like that in a way. It's like the only way that he can like really relate to her in that later scene is by just saying like, all right, like like tell me that I'm desired. Like tell me I have a purpose. Tell me that I'm wanted by you.
mm,
And eventually like it's almost like through pantomime again, like a child. Like it's like you learn how to speak through you being spoken to, and she almost like discovers the language of her own compassion and her own love for him through
mm,
that bit. And it's again, it's like the way it's played with the score. Like I think a lot of people take that now as they're like, oh, it's like a kind of like a weird, creepy, like sexual assault scene. I think
mm,
it's more about like you have like two people who, for all intents and purposes, aren't really human and don't act like humans do,
mm,
and they're trying to discover what humanity is. And humanity, like a part of that, is that again, it's messy and it's kind of like it's full of a lot of weird stuff, and it's not going to come across in like an expressly quote unquote like a naively good way.
mm,
And I like that Ridley and the screenwriters for this had the maturity, and I think especially the performers too. Like they had the maturity to play it in a more dangerous way than I think would be allowed now.
mm.
And not to say that like oh like I'm not like making some like right wing provocation here because fuck that shit. But
Yeah,
what I mean is I think there's a room in a movie like this that's so concerned with darkness to allow the characters to fumble and to allow them to not have like there's no like come to Jesus moment here. Like
yeah,
it's like a messy stepping stone to humanity, and like that itself is like it's a crooked path, right? But it is a path, and
mm.
it's walked with trepidation, but it's walked nonetheless. And like yeah, I don't know, like what do you feel about all that?
Well, the thing I always think about this scene, and it is like a contentious point when trying to sort of talk about the scene, is I always think about my memories of reading the book. And in the book, like their relationship is a lot more. explicit. Like there is an entire chapter where they kind of, if I remember rightly, they meet in a hotel room, Rachel and Deckard, and he knows that she's a replicant, and there's this entire section, an inner monologue of like him reckoning with the idea of sleeping with a replicant and like what it will mean to understand the feelings of someone who isn't human, and it's a real kind of play on humanity. But I just don't think that would work within the context of this film. I think the fabric of this film is much more um, is much more implicit. It's much like, and I think your reading of it is a lot truer to the kind of noir perspective. And there is a kind of Ralph Meeker-esque quality to Deckard. Not entirely. Like Ralph Meeker in something like Kiss Me Deadly is much more of a kind of explicit bastard.
Well, yeah,
But
he's a piece of shit. I mean, well,
yeah,
I would also say that's a much more darker film than this is.
yeah,
Just
it's
because I think it's more like in your face. Like, I mean, it's kind of weird to say about a movie from the '50s, but it's much more violent.
yeah. I think I was just reaching for the first kind of like nasty noir that I could come to
Yeah,
mind.
well, I
Kiss Me
mean,
Deadly is
that's
always on my
that's
mind anyway,
yeah,
so
that's kind of
I
a one to
I
beat all
need
the others, really.
to talk it out. But no, I think your reading is. I think there is a real conversation to be had, and it's just too easy for me. And I know I say this as a kind of arch defender of the film. It's too easy for me to say that it is just a kind of like very unenlightened stumble. And I mean, there it doesn't play well. I'll go to that. Like to just sit with it. It is uncomfortable, but to say
Well,
there's
I think it's
nothing in
supposed
that
to be.
is not.
I think
Yeah, I
I
think
think
that's yeah.
there's I think the cinema has space for being uncomfortable. I think that's okay. I don't like a lot of people. It's like they see this scene, they're like, "Oh, well, I immediately like hate Deckard or whatever," and it's like, well, like the movie is not
I
really
don't go
about
into
whether
that. Yeah,
you like him or not. It's about
yeah,
like his journey, and it's like, are we willing to like follow what his journey is? And if we aren't, I think that says something about our limited capacity for empathy, because like this is a character who has like basically shown like no connection with any other person throughout the
mm,
entire film. This is the first time we like get an insight as to like, all right, like what is like how does he approach uh like, something that he's interested in, that he's curious about, and that he's like he wants to express affection.
mm,
And and in that it's like, you know, she reacts with fear, and he doesn't like want to let that shit go, because he's like, well, it's like this is literally all that I've got. Like I think
yeah,
when you understand this film from an existential point of view, you're no longer concerned with like, well, what's the current like social norms of like what's right
yeah.
and wrong. Like it's not
There
about
aren't.
being amoral, but it's about like for characters who don't have the luxury of like existing in that like highly morally charged space,
Mm,
like this is them like, again, like figuring out like the most elementary idea of what the world is. It's kind of like when you're a teenager and like you're a little bit of a psychopath because you don't understand fully that the rest of the world uh has like maybe perhaps like a more insightful claim than you do at the age of
yeah,
16 or whatever. And yeah, I just think I think if we kind of look at the scene with like blinders on, we're not really giving it its due. And not to say that, like, again, you have to like we're not validating his behavior here, I think, but I think we're giving it like an understanding. I mean, again,
yeah.
he's like
I think
literally
you
saying
have
like
to
very
trust it.
basic things like a child. He's like I
Yeah,
want you. Like he's not, there's no, it's like desire without romance here. and
yeah.
and I think like the moment when like she affirms this, it's like she realizes like, okay, well, I can speak some desire as well.
Mm,
And and I don't think it's like uh perhaps like as sinister as people sometimes make it out to be. But I also think it shows that like it's like, yeah, like Deckard, it's like he lives a life of violence, so it's like how like how else is he going to respond to such a situation?
mm. I
Oh
think
my god,
every
I love this stuff with Pris, the makeup that she has.
yeah. I mean, I love this. The design of this just fucking blows my mind. Like I love this whole environment, this kind of like clustered warehouse feel of a living space, like living
It's kind of
within.
like Alice in Wonderlandy.
Yeah, it's just gorgeous. I did just want to, I was just thinking as you were saying, like and I kind of mentioned this before, but every character is a kind of analog for this like nature of desire and exploring. I mean, every character, apart from the kind of corporate element with Tyrell and the sort of police element with Brian, is about this kind of, it's all about just trying to find they're all kind of teenagers in a way, and they're all this kind of conduit for like different types of desire. There's the playfulness with Pris and being surrounded by the toys, and Batty is about, Batty is the ultimate kind of edge lord teenager in this kind of context. He is like, what does it all mean? And
Well, but it's like
I
who among us has not been that though?
yeah,
Those are the
exactly,
questions you have when you're a teenager. I think there's nothing
completely,
wrong with that, right? Like there's
yeah,
nothing like a lot of people want to be like, oh, whatever, like they want to dismiss it. These are very valid things, and especially it's like if you put yourself in his context, I would dare anyone to act any differently. I really would.
yeah,
It's like you're alive for 4 years and like you're just discovering like all this stuff and you're trying to like figure out like how to not be a slave. Like okay, like that's a lot to figure out as a 4 year old. So I think he's
mm,
doing, as an okay as a job as he possibly could have given the scenario.
yeah. I think
So,
this film is like absolutely the ultimate kind of example, just the best kind of narrative of finding meaning in a completely. I know this is quite an obvious reading, but I do think it is for the reasons we've stated to do with Deckard and his relationship with Rachel, and that kind of like naive element to the characters is just the best possible kind of exploration of finding meaning in like a completely corporatized, a consumerist kind of nightmare world, especially coming out of the 80s where all that kind of neoliberal stuff just like
well,
went
it's all like
raving
hyper
crazy.
contrived, self conscious, and
Yeah,
cynical. Also,
yeah,
the way that Ridley shoots Pris in this scene, what I
mm,
love is that like her eyes have a slight little orange glimmer to them.
yeah, yeah,
Like when you look at a cat in the darkness and
yeah,
they have like a little reflected like these like moon eyes,
yeah,
and the way he
and-
accomplishes that is so fucking cool. And
yeah,
because I think listening to the commentary, like he basically just attached like a tiny little mirror to the
mm,
side of the camera so that whenever he would like point it at them, given the right direction, that tiny
yeah,
little mirror would reflect into directly into their irises. And it's like,
mm,
like what kind of like that's insanely detail oriented filmmaking, right? Like usually
yeah,
most people wouldn't give a shit, but really it's like, no, I need the orangish, the little twinkle in the eyes, right? Like it's
yeah,
you kind of feel like he himself is Tyrell. He's like putting on a little like how do I make this? He sees the God figure in his
yeah,
movie. He's the
yeah.
I think there's a lot of his movies where there are these like creator figures, like David in the Alien prequels,
Yeah.
and there's like even House of Gucci, right? You have like the Gucci patriarchs who are like, like trying to figure out it's
Yeah.
like what are the implications of what we created here, and that's a question
Mm.
that reoccurs throughout all his filmography with these kind of like father figures.
I have to say, it's a bit of a non sequitur, but sort of returning to like the creation of this film. And I'm not someone who's especially a fan of, I suppose, psychoanalytic readings of film, but there is beyond kind of meaning, there is I think this is unavoidably like a kind of grief, not study, but expression, given that Ridley, I think his older brother, took his own life before the production of this film. And I think he was just very overcome with like this feeling of grief. And obviously thematically he really leans into I mean quite literally with the ending. There is just this like very I think every kind of artistic choice, like minor details, there is this feeling of like memory is about like the thing they say about grief is that it kind of brings everything back. It's like not just your life flashing before your eyes, but your like someone else's, how you understand someone else. I think it's unavoidable in this film when you know these kind of things. And I kind of think I attribute that to why he puts so much into this film, is I think these things are all like uber personal, and he's kind of just in this like, as an artist, I mean, he never shows any of this when he talks about this. He never mentions any of this, so I'm probably really, really reaching, but
Well,
I watch it and I really feel that.
I don't think you're too far from. I mean, look, if that happened to his older brother, it also happens
Mm.
to Tony, right?
Yeah,
I
that's
mean
huge.
that's you know, no matter who you are, I don't care how much you can detach yourself from whatever. Like that's gonna leave a mark on your life. I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence that like the first two movies that Ridley makes after his younger brother passes
Mm.
are the counselor, which is like his fucking like darkest, most depressing, like
Yeah,
borderline nihilistic movie. And then it's also like, Exodus Gods and
Exodus.
King, which is literally
Yeah,
about two brothers who like love each other, but also
yeah, that's so true.
like basically split off in different directions. And not to say that like
Yeah,
those things are like directly analogous to whatever his relationship was with his family, but
yeah.
I think we're drawn to certain things because they reflect parts of our experience and what we find interesting about the world. And um
I think most directors are very afraid of like actually putting that, like baking that into the fabric of their work. You know, they
well,
want to
because you
address
don't want to
things
be
too.
explicit, right? Because
No, I mean, yeah,
what you
this is
want to be
directors.
is that the implication becomes universal. Because if
Yeah.
you if you just make it about yourself, then it becomes one person's story. But if you're able to tell it through a refracted lens, then
Mm,
someone else can see themselves in it and be like, oh hey, like like I understand this feeling because you've made it in a broader context instead of just keeping it intimate.
yeah. Yeah, I feel like in more unfortunate circumstances, directors, they treat their work as kind of their own self-validating kind of own controlled therapy sessions. But I think here it is
Oh
just
yeah, I
someone
don't
who
really like
is
that too
like,
much.
I mean, I'm not into that. And I think here is a really good example of just like that pragmatic artist who's just not afraid to like go with instincts they don't fully understand. I think that's the key to just like, it's like the shimmering in Tyrell's office, or the photo machine that can see round things. It's like things you don't need to kind of reckon with. You're just like feeling things and letting things out, and that kind of, there's a mystery there, and that all kind of, these kind of fractures coalesce if you sort of stay with it. And I think that's probably goes a long way to why people just couldn't get into it when it came out. It's like you're not presented with something kind of immediate. You're presented with pieces, you're presented with kind of isolated moments in a way, like things that don't run
Well,
as a
you're
chorus,
allowed to construct the world yourself,
Yeah.
and essentially every great artist, in my opinion, believes in the agency of the viewer. You
Yeah.
have to. If you don't, then you're shit. Like you're
Yeah.
garbage. Because essentially,
Worthless.
why do what you do then? Like
Yeah.
if you just want to make stuff for yourself, then you can absolutely do that. Like art is a process of trying to communicate universal beauty and universal experiences,
Mm,
um and those universal experiences can be intensely intimate, but
mm,
the way that you make them into poetry instead of just I don't know, anecdote, right? The way to make it poetic is to stage it in terms that are again, like you make it a science fiction movie, you make it a fantasy movie.
yeah.
So okay, to comment on this scene, I love like this like subtle storytelling that like never actually gets explicitly said, but you realize it's
Mm,
like Sebastian is like he's he's not doing well. He's gonna he's like
yeah.
what he's like, oh, like I'm 20 or whatever. He looks like he's gonna fucking keel over any day.
Yeah.
And him being Tyrell's son, what I like so much about that is that it's almost like he's like, well, okay, so I have a son with like a degenerative disease, basically.
Mm,
Um, so what do I do? Well, I make toy men and women to essentially
Yeah.
like be the more authentically realized, powerful children that I wouldn't have had otherwise.
Mm.
And I like this scene. I love this. It's like we suddenly have entered like a medieval scene. Like we've entered a scene from one
Yeah.
of his historical epics, right? And with the
Yeah.
candle lights and just it becomes like a hollowed, like, strange atmosphere.
Mm. There is like again that I love how don't think it's an accident that there is this kind of sense of like very purposeful opulence that I think is very true to like kind of, corporate billionaires is the way they choose because they can choose any lifestyle they want. They're not thrust in their lifestyles, so but they have no taste often. I mean, I would say Tyrell, on the basis of Ridley designing his life, probably has immaculate taste because I would definitely have fuck off big candles if I was a billionaire everywhere. But there is like I love that he kind of picks up on that and he really distinguishes between like Sebastian's apartment and the kind of decrepitness and the sort of encumbrance of everything with this kind of like glowing illuminated space that Tyrell has. I mean it's gorgeous.
See, and I like how like he comes at him with like all these various details. But like, what about
Mm,
this process? What about that process? And it's like you could tell it's like in a way he's already thought about all these and he already knows the kind
yeah.
of bullshit, but he needs, he in a way it's like he needs daddy to tell him like, yeah, that shit ain't gonna work, son. Like you already know
Yeah.
this. Like why are you having me tell you this in a way?
It's a nice mirror to the, in a way, to the Rachel Deckard scene from earlier is just having something
Repeating, yeah.
you externalized and like
Well, because
being
we're talking about like the boundary between like the internal and the external, right? This is what
mm,
that is. It's like all his hopes
yeah,
and dreams
completely
suddenly just get dashed because he's like, yeah, listen, son, like I literally designed you for one purpose, which is
to
to
die.
die. like
Yeah.
I and like it's like a radical, like a truly radical thing to face, I think. Which
Mm,
is like, if not to get into like specific questions of religion, but it's like if you do believe that like you are a creation and that you were created for like a purpose or created with the capacity to determine your own purpose by some other thing, like to actually face the idea that like you like within your capacity is also the destiny of death, and that like you cannot like there's no getting away from that. Like your ego is not going to survive that shit. It's like your physical body will just be fucking destroyed because
mm,
we can see it happen all the time through like various things in our existence, and we're constantly reminded of it. And I think a lot of Western capitalism is about like trying to, both profit off of death and decay, but also deny it at every single term. And you're like, you can't, like, it's like, what are you going to do? It's like, well, when you just own up to that shit, it's, I mean, I think it's a question that it's like for some people, it'll break them. And for someone like Roy Batty, it's like, in the end, just doing that like kind of gives him license to be like, well, fuck it. You know what I mean? It's like okay, like I literally have to come to this like almost like this nirvana enlightenment because I have no other recourse. Because I
mm,
have to, and it doesn't matter how long I have left to live. It's just I have to figure it out right here and right now
yeah.
because any time is valuable. And I think like despite this movie's darkness, it is ultimately like a very hopeful movie, and it's a movie
Mm,
that really like cares about these kind of questions and cares about like what the audience might take away from that. And I think you could there's parts of like Blade Runner 2049 which like, I feel like edge more into depressive territory that this
mm,
doesn't. And that's what I appreciate about what Ridley does is that he never again he has like such he has a lot of despair in his work, but it never outside of like some stuff like Prometheus, maybe an Alien Covenant, he's never just like, all right, but like this is it for the sake of it. Like,
Yeah.
um, I don't know, like, but like when you think about that, when you think about like these themes of, just like absolute, like the limits of human life ingrained in reality, like, is that a thing that you feel? I don't know. I almost like it almost feels like too obvious for some artists to explore because it's such a part of you know the world that it becomes
Yeah.
like, oh well, let's talk about anything but that. But in a way, I think it foregrounds almost everything that humans do, right? In a very like Heideggerian Hegelian way, like the
Mm,
human being is defined by its capacity to be finite, and like that maybe that's not like we want to say like, oh, that's terrible. It's like maybe it's not a bad thing, right? Maybe that you can only have meaning in a world where things definitively end, and that means that like for whatever time they're around, like that means that whatever actions are taken, whatever things come into being, it's only worthwhile because you're like, well, okay, but this couldn't have been, right? Like things only
mm,
mean a thing at all. It's only meaningful because, well, maybe this couldn't have happened, but it did, and so we have to reckon with that. We have to, in a way, almost be thankful for that, um, or in some cases, not be thankful, right? But like we have to make that choice, and it's almost like death forces us to create meaning out of something where if we just lived forever, if we were just fucking vampires, right? Like I wonder if like in a way it's like we would become like really bored with existence
yeah.
because it would be just like, okay, well, it's the same thing over and over again. Who gives a fuck? Like nothing
Yeah.
changes. So what's the point? Like, and I think like what's so great about the climax of this movie is that it forces Deckard to be like, all right, man, like I could literally kill you right fucking now. And you got to just like this is an opportunity for me to reveal something to you that you don't know, and it's an opportunity to become what I'm supposed to be, right? And just the beautiful poetry of that both happening at the same time, like
Mm.
I mean it speaks so much to me. um Sorry, I don't know, I started
No,
that off with like a question, but it just kind of turned into a ramble. But
no,
yeah, what do you think about all that?
it was perfect. I mean, I really wish Ridley, when he was at this height, had done a vampire movie. That would have been, fucking amazing. Just at this level of visual kind
Well,
of
his brother
acuity.
did, right?
What was? Oh, The Hunger, of course. I forget about The
Yeah,
Hunger. Yeah,
literally a year after this, so yeah,
yeah.
not too far off.
I guess like it's not. It obviously is such a huge part of just the nature of this film. But I think Ridley, but the interesting thing about him is he doesn't write his own films. So his writing, his authorship is purely within the visuals, and he's the type of personality that will not back down from that. That is not going to give over to, well, let's let the story tell itself. What I think he does instead is much more interesting. Is really trust in something being embedded in the reasons to make a film in the first place. Like why you go from like the writer like Hampton Fancher, who, as I understand it, is an incredibly emotional and invested in all these kind of philosophical kind of ideas, to then like a financier who is completely removed from all that and is incredibly just concerned with turnaround and the kind of business end of things. But within all these people, they trust in a reason to do something, and I think like Ridley he's almost like the kind of he brings this all together. And I mean, I'm going a bit wayward from the point, but I think that he knows that like there is a sense of understanding, especially given the kind of grief element which we spoke about before, about just that the kind of terminus built within each of us, and that kind of that there is not an eternal kind of prospect for anybody, and that's not,
Or
and
what I would challenge is perhaps like the only way to get an eternity is to really affirm the idea that death is a reality, right? If you live in
yeah,
denial of it, you're not going to get shit. But
yeah,
but if you're able to come to terms with it, right? I mean, I think that's what this movie is, right? It's like this
yeah,
movie by like being, you know, kind of confrontational and really like against what a lot of like was going on at the time. I think like ahead of what was going on, and you know, being willing to fail, right? Precisely by, you
Yeah,
know, by willing to be a bomb, right? Then it became the legend that it became, right? It's
yeah,
only like the risk taking is where the value comes from. If you don't take a risk, then you know, nothing means anything.
yeah, completely. I guess that is literally the point of the film, and obviously the ending is about stopping. Is like not the process when Batty comes in the next scene, like, and it goes on for like the scene plays out really really long. It is that unraveling of Batty's idea of living beyond his kind of purpose, you know, like it is that sort of ceases, and it's not, obviously there's this cat and mouse element, but there's never really this sense that once Batty gets, like, obviously he breaks his hand, but that, you know, once he finally gets to him, it's the, you know, he's that whole kind of process within him breaks down, and it is like about he's just
Well,
drawn
it's
into
instead
the
of
kind of pain of life, really.
he yeah, exactly, like he ceases to be like, you know, what he was called out, you know, he's like, oh, like you're so perfect, and he's like yes, and like, but then
Yeah,
it becomes like this is the scene where he becomes like not perfect, where it's like,
yeah,
all right, like I have to put myself through pain, and I had to face headlong like
yeah.
like literally like a guy tried to kill me, and the inevitability that I'm going to die anyway. And
Mm.
like he starts to have fun, you know what I mean? He starts to laugh, he starts to, you
Put
know,
nails
like
in his
just
hands and
he
stuff.
he like engages in a reverie during
Yeah,
this scene, which takes it from like just another like cat and mouse thing.
yeah.
I think it makes it ascend towards like you realize that like he's like moving towards a different level of his existence than he was at previously.
Mm. Yeah, I think this bit with Priss, this is where he's just because he knows now because of the Tyrell conversation that there is nothing that can be done. So what is he really doing here? You know, like
Yeah,
he's
exactly.
trying to get vengeance for Priss, I guess, but his kind of overall um purpose is kind of just dissolved. And so it is about like the fun of just, I don't know. There is just a kind of something he's engaging with through Deckard here that
Well,
is like,
I love all this stuff. He's like, he starts mocking him. He's like, aren't you
yeah,
the good man? Like,
yeah,
like it's not very sporting to fire on an unarmed guy. And it's like, I
yeah,
mean, throughout the entire scene, you're like, yeah, he's right.
yeah.
Dude,
My favorite line in the
this
whole
whole bit
film.
with the
Mm,
water on the surface of the wall,
yeah,
unreal.
gorgeous,
Like, it's
gorgeous.
just it doesn't get much better. That's the Tarkovsky shit, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The elemental kind of thing.
Absolutely.
I love that stuff. This really fucked me up when I saw it when he breaks his
Oh yeah.
fingers.
Oh, that's
Harrison plays it so well as well, like
well,
just
like,
the little
Harrison Ford is one of
dark
the ultimate
screen
like guys reacting in pain in
pain
any
face.
movie.
Yeah.
Like every time he gets beat up in Indiana Jones, you're like, "Oof, that hurts. That's not good."
Him and Pierce Brosnan duking it out for who does the best pain reaction, makes the best like pained
Oh, well, Pierce
sound.
Brosnan does some good ones too.
He does, yeah.
Yeah,
He's pretty up there.
the Xena on a top scene.
Yeah.
Ah!
Very English pain sound.
Yes.
Though he's Irish, I shouldn't say that really. That's funny.
Oh, 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 yeah, yeah.
I've just
That's rough. That's rough. You're not
I've
gonna recover from that one.
I've just nulled this podcast beyond any, it's been banished from the I've been banished from the critical roll call.
So over.
But he's playing a spy, so it's fine. He's playing a British spy, so
Well, yeah, he's playing an imperialist technically, so
yeah,
that works.
exactly. It's fine, it's fine.
See, something that this film does that I love is that like the replicants like don't bleed anything weird, you
Mm,
know? Like
yeah,
it's not like Alien where like they bleed white.
like
You know,
milky,
it's like
yeah.
there's literally like nothing visually to distinct them from anything else. There's
I
just
feel like, yeah.
like in visual terms, like it's like really so smart because in visual terms they are already human. You know, it just takes the whole
Mm,
film for this realization to happen. But otherwise, like there's nothing to indicate otherwise.
I think it. I feel as though it wouldn't really work if there was. You know, it's the idea of a replicant is not like a robot. It's just a human you that other humans make. You know, and I think that's the really smart decision. Is that it isn't. Yeah, I think having that kind of, and obviously I feel like Ridley probably didn't want to go the way of like Ash in Alien and have just this malfunctioning machine sort of becoming kind of Hal and murderous. It's about sort of like replicated humanities, you know, it's like trying to design humanity and implant memories and control that. Um, I mean, this whole sequence is just fucking insane. Like, just making like the just sensory overload in this kind of structure, you know, this building, and just the lights are absolutely like the lightning and just everything that's going on here is just, I mean, it is very pure cinema.
I mean, like right here, we're just it's almost like it's like we're at like the apex, like SSS tier of like hyperbolic like foot slaying territory, right? Like
Yeah,
it's just like we're like so far into complete expressionism that like we're almost like yeah, again it's like if we're talking about like transcendence, then like we're definitely uh getting close to that. Just it feels
yeah,
like the lighting is so strong. I mean, this
yeah,
whole scene could basically be black and white, and like you couldn't tell the difference really.
yeah. This whole bit when he's by the window is just unbelievable. Just the intensity, like
Oh, I mean,
of
Rucker
that.
Hauer is one of the all-time best. Like, his
Yeah,
performance in this is unfucking real.
yeah, so good. I really feel like the film couldn't have quite worked in the same way had he not have brought that and built that in, because I think having him against Harrison Ford, and there is that weariness and kind of begrudgingness of everything Harrison Ford's doing. Even when he's being chased, there is this kind of just like, you know, dragging himself through just out of danger. But with Rutger Hauer, he plays it with this kind of bombast, and like he literally puts his head like through the ceramic wall. It's like
It fucking
so
rules.
uber dramatic. It's so good. Also, this is one of my favorite, if not maybe my favorite line in the whole thing, when he's like, "That's the spirit." I think that's just so like perfect for what he's doing right here.
Dude, the way that's edited when he whacks him with the pipe, it looks so
Yeah,
fucking painful. Like the
yeah,
sound design is so brutal. It's like, yeah, that's probably what it would feel like to get hit with the
yeah.
pipe.
There's a oh, well, I'll mention it when it comes up. There's another edit
I'll say
just
we got
towards
the
the
birds
end.
again here.
Yeah, just like he's just throwing everything in, and it all works. Like no one else could do this. Like
Oh yeah.
it's just he'll put anything just to get that. It never feels like that kind of. And I know he's not part of this kind of movement, but that MTV music video just talking about the
Well, no,
commercial
I mean,
element.
I think he definitely is. I mean, he's really the first guy, right? He's the first
Yeah,
one
I think
to be a part of
he's the
that.
proto kind of
Yeah.
the sort of proto punk of that. He's that he never. I don't think he's ever made a music video, but he obviously introduced all these visual ideas and that kind of
Yeah. I mean,
musical.
it's hard to imagine like so much existing without what he did in commercials
Yeah,
first, which just then later got co-opted into music videos.
yeah,
Which all this stuff I miss so much because I didn't grow up with it, but like
mm.
watching it as an adult and like watching these movies, I'm like, fuck, man. I would literally stick a nail through my fucking hand, like right batty here, if we got to have something this beautiful in
Yeah,
theaters on a consistent basis. Like, critics back in the day, I'm sorry, you fuckers didn't know what you fucking had. You didn't
yeah.
know how good you
How
had
good
it.
it was. Yeah,
Okay.
you really
Well,
didn't.
people like watching Batman '89. They're like, oh, these like enormous sets and matte paintings and these beautiful effects, and
Yeah,
then just watch it being like, yeah, it's okay. I guess it's like motherfucker, like you are being treated right now. Okay, like
yeah.
again, like
You're living like
tipping up
hogs.
like Powell and Pressburger again. It's like we look at those movies now, we're like, oh yeah, of course. But like back then, like they were kind of considered like, oh, it's chintzy. Oh, they're doing what they do. It's like, motherfucker, like these
They
guys
tapped it.
are
They cracked the
operating.
code.
Yeah, they did it right. They accomplished it, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's like the spirit of the time just didn't catch up to to what the individuals were doing, which is like I mean, because you're a part of the UK, right? So like
Mm.
I don't know, like I don't have like a super informed perspective, but it seems to me like so many of the best in British directors, like I don't know, like they don't really get recognized in their own country, and
Mm.
I don't understand what this phenomenon is. Like they're kind of like a little bit like, oh well, whatever. Like they're kind of discredited, and then I always have to ask like why, like because like okay,
I
like
think about this a lot.
Ridley got knighted in a lot, but sorry, yeah, no, go ahead, you talk about it.
Well, just to say that I think about this a lot because obviously I come from here and there is a sense. I think what it like I look at directors from here who are incredibly kind of sensuous and almost embarrassingly kind
Yeah,
of
Ken
like
Russell.
yeah. Ken Russell being like completely up there, and they are derided. And Ridley, people love these films, but Ridley is still thought of as like a stylist, over substance, which is something I think a lot of cultures seem to be. Well, not too many, but definitely Western cultures seem to have a real craw in their side about. But I think there is an element of repression, and especially true with Ridley, as someone who, if he didn't make these films, if you heard him speak, you would not think he would even like these films. Just the way he talks about his art and his craft is not someone I would necessarily associate with having made something this like incredibly unashamedly like gorgeous and like so full of so many things, and such disregard for like narrative and conventional storytelling. Just quickly, sorry, I will come back to that point, but this edit here where he catches him is sort of what I was gonna isolate before us. Just the editing here is like he should definitely fall, but the way it's cut is so, and the noise he makes as well. Like I have this moment kind of really embedded in my brain because there is this kind of musical, almost like theatrical
Well,
catch.
I get the editing of it
Mm,
realizes like the transcendence of the character, right? Like
yeah,
you're like it's almost like he's reaching beyond the physical boundaries of the space and entering into the film space.
yeah. It's such a brilliant, just like
It's like Roy
filmic
Batty
moment.
himself becomes the editor, and he's like, no, like this is
Yeah,
what's happening.
I'm stopping time. I'm stopping him midair so I can catch him. Fucking, it's just fucking brilliant.
Yeah, I don't know if we can talk over this. I don't know. I feel
Yeah,
like it's almost like it's almost
sacrilegious.
sacrilege.
Yeah.
No man, like Ridley's the best. He just like with this with the when he gets into like the slow motion and you get the step
Mm,
frames and like it's just so elegant. It's
it
like
just
yeah, just
works
it's
every
like
single time.
fuck, god damn it.
Like no matter how many times I see it, it works and it's new and it's like fucking cathartic as hell. And I think that's the Ridley secret is it's not being uplifting, it's not being morose, it's
Well,
being just
it's just
fucking
poetic. It's pure
pure.
poetry.
Yeah, it's just like that catharsis. It's the catharsis of art. It's like yeah, there's really no fucking words. There's just apart from, time to die.
I mean, that those were his first words in the movie and his last words, right?
Yeah, time. Funny how like thinking about the theatrical cut, how it absolutely butt fucks like so many moments in this film, like where the
Yeah.
voiceover comes in this moment, and
Well,
also
the
earlier it
voiceover
like
to me is like it's like you're putting a hat on a hat, and
yeah,
you're like adding something where you're gilding the lily, and
yeah.
you're taking something that's already implicit and
I
making it
think it's
explicit, which is the cardinal sin of all art. Is like being
I
too explicit.
I consider it non-canonical. Like I think
Yeah,
that's what
yeah.
Ridley and definitely Harrison Ford. I think that is pure fan fiction. That voiceover.
But what I love about this ending bit is
Mm,
all like the handheld camera.
yeah, she doesn't use loads. Like Chases is mainly, but he's very kind of
Well, not in
sort
this
of
movie. Later
still.
on, I think he gets more loose with it. But even
Yeah,
then,
yeah, yeah,
he flips between certain modes. Sometimes he'll use it a lot. Sometimes he won't.
yeah.
Because I don't think Alien really has any of that shit.
What
But
handheld? I know there's a couple shots I think
okay, yeah, there's a
with the
couple, but
handhelds
like,
when
but a
they're
lot
like
of it is like
running.
motion controlled stuff.
Yeah, when they're running down, when the acid is burning through the ship, I seem to remember there's like a couple bits where they're like
Yes,
running
you're
after it.
right.
But very rare. I mean, they really stick. I mean, like I am very averse to handhelds. I think it's something that's become way too much of a thing in the last 10 years. Just everything's handheld, and I don't. I
Well,
like
I
the
mean,
position.
the ultimate laziness I think of it is that like basically it's an excuse to not frame shit. Like
Yeah,
it just becomes an excuse to be like, all right, well, I don't actually have to direct this just because
yeah.
whatever. And like it's, I mean, the stuff that drives me up the wall is when you have handheld and it's all of close-ups, and so you have like a person's face and it's just jittery as fuck. And I'm like, stop
Mm,
this! Like
yeah,
I mean, it's insanity to me. But yeah, thankfully, Ridley's never really. I mean, he does that. He uses handheld in the proper capacity, I think.
yeah, definitely.
So this shit is like, it's like when he comes here and like he thinks that that she might be dead,
Mm,
and like for her to be alive, like I don't know, you just feel like it's such a miracle for him. Where he's like fuck,
yeah.
like okay, like here's something, right?
There's just like this feel like when you watch scenes like this. I don't know. I'm really trying to articulate like how I feel watching them, and it can't like it's the way the sound plays in, and like there is kind of meters and levels at which a moment plays, and how quiet something can be, and how that
It's very
makes it so
delicate.
much more like. But yeah, it's just I don't know. It's delicate in a way that even films I would describe as being delicate, I don't think do it in quite the same way. It's like this film is just completely unique. Like not even Ridley really ever did anything quite like this again. And I like love sort of a lot of his films for various reasons, but it just
Well, I
was
think
he
he
really
realized
got
like, all right, like I did that, is about as good as it can be done, and
yeah.
also I think it's important to realize that this film was like basically reconstructed given
Yeah.
the advances in the knowledge of his later career. So it's
Mm,
kind of like the film of his entire career rather than like the film of 1982 really that we're watching.
mm, yeah, completely. I also think just actually physically filming this, like, just drove him probably a little bit insane. Like the
Well, it
effort
sounds
to
like
do it.
it sounds like a shit show. I mean, like a lot of
Yeah.
productions were in the 80s where it just, it's yeah. I mean, not that like you didn't get the money's worth out of it, but I do have to wonder for people who were just like it's like Ridley like I think in some ways he bullshitted them into thinking that he was making Star Wars when he absolutely was not
Yeah.
doing that. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Man.
but yeah, I mean, I know Philip K. Dick. I mean, he died the same year that
Mm,
this came out, and I know he saw like a rough cut of it, and like he was really
yeah,
impressed by it.
yeah.
And I don't know. There's a part of me that gets upset that he wasn't able to see this because this is like the first great adaptation of his work
Yeah.
cinematically, and I don't know. Like he as a writer was always very like I think cinematically minded because he always
Mm,
came up with ideas first. He was like, "What's an interesting idea that would
mm.
like be compelling?" And those ideas are very translatable to all different kinds of medium.
It's
Um,
interesting with.
but
Sorry, go ahead.
I think he would be proud of movies like this and Total Recall and Minority Report, which I think all really do. I mean, they're all made by masters, and they capture the essence of PKD's oeuvre.
Mm. I mean, he watched, I think, the effects reel, so like the effects shots, and he said, as far as I like can remember, he said that it was as though someone had taken his inner world and put it on the screen, which is an
Yeah,
insane compliment.
because a lot of
Like,
his stuff is like very noirish and
yeah,
very pulpy, and I think just really just he immediately understood that. He was like, all right, well
yeah,
we'll just do the ultimate version of this. And
yeah,
yeah, it's kind of like you watch this and like the idea of like neo noir is its whole like own thing, but I
mm,
don't. It's like hard to get more definitive than Blade Runner. I
yeah,
don't think you can really. It just like how like it's like no movie can really, at least no American movie can escape the horizon that Kubrick created in many ways.
yeah,
I think it's hard for people to work in making like high octane visual storytelling, and I think it's almost like Ridley was too good at his job and such he had such a high watermark that like
mm,
no one could meet his standards, or that that basically people tried and like it just I don't know we I don't think that's a good excuse really, but I imagine someone telling themselves that. um yeah, also like just the filming of this, just the glorious, like, I mean, this is a fucking CinemaScope movie, right? This
yeah.
is
Was it
CinemaScope,
70 millimeter?
Panavision.
Mm,
Like, it's just it's goodness. Like I for the years, like the copy I had of this was to see it on a DVD that was cropped to 185, and
right.
like watching it actually in its proper aspect ratio, I'm like, oh God tier Ridley, just fucking like, again, I think he's also one of the great like underrated composers for frames where he always knows what he's taking advantage of, and he switches in between 185 and 235 fairly
Mm.
often. And I think he's like, he just, he's an expert artist. He knows how to frame stuff like a painting. It always looks
He
good,
knows
never
what he
bad.
needs. Yeah. He knows the canvas. He knows what he needs before him before he can put anything down.
Yeah. Well,
Man, I feel like I
we're
could talk about this film for
yeah, we might have to
days
do a second
and
commentary someday. But yeah,
yeah.
thank you for doing this with me.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Was
It's
does
been
anyone
amazing.
listen to this need to know about anything that you're up to? I know you're working on a
Um,
film.
if anyone likes pristine, gorgeous, opulent, completely narrative free, no exceptions, perfect movies, then no, I don't. I'm just kidding. I do make films. I am making a film. If you want to see what I make, I'm mostly active on Instagram, which is Tomo Film, and my Twitter as well is Tom C. Oliver, where I just sort of stick my oar in the state of cinema as it is today. And if you're on Letterboxd, I think I'm Tom C. Oliver on there as well, so you can hear similar spewing on those forums. That's where I'm at.
Alrighty. And just like the film, uh, this audio commentary is dedicated to the memory of Philip K. Dick.
Nice.
Uh, and
Nice.
yeah, I'll see you all next time. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye bye.